What would you do if a dog stopped in front of a sealed evidence locker no one had touched in nearly 30 years, lifted his nose toward cold government metal, and found a scent so small no machine had ever flagged it, yet strong enough to tear open the lie that had buried a murdered woman for 27 years? The retired soldier did not answer that question with words. He answered it the way he answered most things now, with silence first, breath second, and movement only when he was certain movement mattered. The old county forensic annex smelled like dead paper, rusted cabinets, stale coffee, floor wax, wet dust, and rain dragged in from the parking lot by people who had long ago stopped believing any file in that building could still surprise them. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that tired electric buzz common to underfunded government buildings. And somewhere deeper in the annex, a loose fit rattled every few seconds, like a machine that had forgotten how to quit. Beside him, the Belgian Malinois stood perfectly still beneath a dark working harness, tan coat cut by a black facial mask, lean body tightened into total concentration, ears high, chest barely moving, every line of him alive with purpose. He had not barked. He had not pawed. He had not paced. He had only stopped in front of locker B19 and inhaled once, with such complete focus that the veteran felt the warning rise through his own spine before anyone else in the room understood something had changed. The detective leaning against the intake counter had been talking a moment earlier about chain of custody restrictions, budget pressure, and why no sane county office would spend money reopening a homicide file older than half the deputies now wearing badges, but his voice thinned and then disappeared when he saw the dog lock in. Across the room, the evidence clerk lowered a stack of yellowing inventory sheets and frowned, as if the animal had just broken some private law that kept his world organized. If you believe in stories where loyalty sees what the world has missed, where discipline outlasts doubt, and where truth waits in silence until one impossible moment finally gives it breath, then this journey on Shepherd Soldier Stories is for you. The retired soldier stepped closer to the locker, though not close enough to disturb the air around the indication. He did not need to ask whether the dog was certain. Over years of work, that animal had learned the language of explosives, tremors in a man's breathing, collapsing walls, fear buried under cologne, and the invisible signatures left behind when violence and concealment shared the same hour. The dog had once found explosive residue buried beneath rain-soaked rubble after every scanner on site failed. He did not freeze like that for nothing. The detective pushed off the counter and came forward with suspicion tightening his face. "What is he doing?" he asked, though the question was less about understanding than comfort, as if naming the moment might somehow make it ordinary again. The veteran never took his eyes off the dog. "He's telling you there's something in that locker your file forgot." The detective gave a dry, skeptical laugh, but it died almost instantly. Buildings like this taught people not to trust hope. Hope made disappointment feel personal. 27 years earlier, a young woman had been found dead in a burned-out service lot behind a freight spur on the rough edge of town, one shoe missing, one hand curled against gravel, one spent shell casing near a drainage curb, and a weak trace of particulate residue that never led anywhere solid enough to survive in court. Back then, the killing had been called different things by different men depending on what the week needed. A bad neighborhood homicide. A personal dispute. A robbery gone wrong. A convenient suspect with a temper and poor timing. Then, when enough years passed and outrage finally lost funding, it became a cold case, which was simply the respectable bureaucratic phrase for a wound the institution had decided to stop touching. Yet even in the dead paperwork there had always been one bruise that refused to fade. The shell casing recovered from the scene had shown trace residue inconsistent with the weapon later tied to the county's preferred suspect, and the victim's blouse had produced conflicting lab notes, months apart, one claiming no actionable residue, the other suggesting contamination too degraded to classify. The file had survived not by being solved, but by being shelved, shifted from office to office, election to election, detective to detective, until everyone involved learned to treat the failure as if time itself had signed off on it. The retired soldier had not come to the annex looking for redemption. Men who had worn uniforms spent half their lives being lied to about redemption. One more mission. One more burden carried cleanly enough. One more useful act, and maybe the weight inside them would finally balance. He had stopped believing in that a long time ago. He had come because the detective who called him understood two things most people did not. First, that he still answered when the work had real gravity. And second, that this dog had a way of finding what the rest of the world had decided was gone. The detective had sounded almost ashamed on the phone, as though asking a retired soldier and a Malinois to look at a county cold case was less a professional decision than a final admission that the official path had failed. The veteran had agreed before pride could interfere because beneath the detective's words he recognized the sound of a man nearing the point where silence became more unbearable than humiliation. The dog took another measured step toward the locker seam and inhaled again. Then he shifted lower, bypassing the handle, the obvious contact points, the places every human hand would inspect first, and moved his nose instead toward the lower hinge line where dust had built into pale gray ridges and untouched air had settled for years. That choice narrowed the veteran's attention instantly. Dogs did not care about story. They cared about what the world was actually made of. If the Malinois ignored the obvious and went to the hinge, it meant the meaningful scent lived where no human expected it to. "Open it," the veteran said. The evidence clerk almost recoiled. "You can't just open it," the detective snapped, sharper than he had been all night, and the room changed at once because government rooms always changed when authority finally remembered how to sound like itself. The clerk went to a locked drawer, fetched a ring of tag keys, and crossed the floor with a slow, reluctant care that made it feel as though every step toward that old locker pushed him deeper into something the annex itself would rather leave asleep. Metal scraped. The key turned. The hinge gave with a dry, protesting whine. Inside sat 3 archival boxes, 1 sealed plastic evidence tote, 2 separate firearms envelopes, and a smaller gray container marked with a faded property tag from the year of the murder. The clerk instinctively reached for the nearest box. "Don't," the veteran said quietly. He did not need volume. The dog had already moved. He bypassed every large item, every obvious container, and went straight to the small gray box at the back right corner, half hidden behind the tote. He stopped with his nose hovering just above the seam, held there for one grave second, and then slowly sat. Formal indication. No doubt. No theater. A breath left the detective in a way that sounded almost painful. "That," the veteran said, "is your answer." The evidence clerk stared, as if the animal had violated the laws of the physical world. "That's impossible," he said. "That box hasn't been opened since." He stopped because dates mattered in evidence rooms, and everyone present understood exactly what the unfinished sentence meant. If the box had really stayed sealed that long, then what the dog had found was not fresh contamination. It was old truth. The detective crouched beside the gray container, wiped the faded tag with his thumb, and read the label under his breath. Property, lot scrapings and secondary residue collection. Recovery site, West Drainage Lip, South End. Then beneath that, in handwriting so faded it looked like a ghost trying to remain readable, another note appeared. Microdebris retained for delayed analysis. The detective looked up sharply. "Nobody ever processed the secondary scrapings," he said. "They logged them and boxed them." The veteran kept his eyes on the dog, who remained locked in the sit, not seeking praise, not blinking, just holding the point because holding the point was the work. "No," the veteran said. "Somebody processed enough to know they mattered." Then somebody made sure they stayed buried. That landed harder than anyone wanted it to. Neglect was one thing. Design inside neglect was another. The evidence clerk backed away from the open locker, as if the metal itself had become dangerous. "You're saying this was hidden?" The detective stared at the gray box in disbelief. "I'm saying a dog just found a microscopic scent signature in a sealed evidence container after 27 years. Rain began tapping the narrow high windows and thin hard lines, and the whole annex suddenly felt different, as if the building itself had shifted slightly off its foundation. A dead case had inhaled. The veteran watched the dog breathe once more toward the lower seam of the gray container, then angled his nose slightly, as if the important trace lived not in the box alone, but in something preserved inside it, something powder-based, something so old and so small it had outlived the attention of every human being assigned to it. Not fresh cinematic residue. Not visible grit. Something microscopic, woven into dust, fiber, and time. The detective reached toward the box with careful hands, and at that exact moment the Malinois rose, turned his head toward the far end of the corridor, and growled low enough to freeze every person in the annex where they stood. Someone else had just entered the building. The footsteps came slow and measured, not the rush slap of a deputy carrying forms, not the easy stride of a clerk who belonged there, but the pace of someone who understood the power of arriving late and still owning the room. The detective straightened, suspicion hardening across his face, and the evidence clerk went pale before the figure even stepped into view. The man who entered the annex wore county clothes, not uniform, a dark expensive coat wet at the shoulders, shoes too polished for an after-hours call, silver hair damp at the temples, and a face trained by years of hearings and private negotiations into a mask of controlled patience. Assistant County Prosecutor. Wrong office. Wrong floor. Wrong hour. Nothing about his presence in that room made sense unless he already knew the old Freightspur file had just moved. His eyes passed over the open locker, the gray box, the detective, the dog, and finally the veteran, and the veteran saw it then, small but real, the first flicker of urgency inside a man who had spent years learning never to show it. "I heard there was activity on the old case," he said. "I thought it best to see the situation for myself before county resources were wasted on sentiment." The word sat wrong in the annex. Sentiment. As if a murdered woman had become an emotional inconvenience rather than a life flattened under paper and neglect. The dog's growl deepened. The prosecutor glanced at him, and for the first time that night the veteran saw the shape of the real battle emerging. This was no longer about whether the dog had found something. He had. This was about whether that microscopic truth would be allowed to live long enough to reach daylight. And from the speed with which the wrong man had appeared in the wrong room, the veteran understood that whatever had been buried in that gray box had not stayed forgotten for everyone. Have you ever watched a room change because one man arrived at exactly the wrong moment, and every instinct in your body told you he had not come to learn the truth, but to see whether it had finally woken up? The assistant county prosecutor stood beneath the fluorescent annex lights with rain darkening the shoulders of his expensive coat, silver hair damp at the temples, umbrella still dripping against one polished shoe, and the kind of expression men learned only after years of speaking over grief until grief began to sound procedural. He was not homicide. He was not evidence chain. He was not forensic staff. He had no legitimate reason to be in that decaying county annex at that hour unless something in the Freightspur file mattered to him before the official notification chain should have even known the room was open. The detective straightened slowly, the exhaustion in his face giving way to a sharper, angrier suspicion. The evidence clerk went pale in the instinctive way lower men often did when power walked into the wrong room at the wrong time. The Belgian Malinois did not bark. He did something worse. He took one deliberate step toward the prosecutor, nose lifting just enough to taste the air around his raincoat, and the retired soldier felt the cold certainty settle in his chest. The dog had not finished reading the evidence. He had simply found another page of it standing upright in a human body. "Didn't know this building was on your route," the detective said. The prosecutor's eyes moved once across the room, taking in the open locker, the small gray evidence box, the clerk, the dog, the veteran, and finally the detective, as though even the order of that glance had been chosen to remind everyone present that he was accustomed to entering late and still controlling the temperature. "I heard there was movement on the old case," he said. "I thought it best to see the situation for myself before county resources got wasted on sentiment." The word sat ugly in the annex. Sentiment. As if a murdered woman and 27 years of failure had become little more than a budget inconvenience with feelings attached. The detective laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Funny," he said. "You got here awfully fast for a man who shouldn't have known anything happened." The prosecutor did not blink. "I stay informed." The retired soldier said nothing yet. He had known men like this in other lives and other places. They rarely arrived first. They arrived after the bodies, after the blast, after the confusion. Once enough damage had already been done that truth could begin getting dressed in cleaner language. The prosecutor's gaze flicked again toward the dog. "That the animal?" he asked. The detective's mouth tightened. "Interesting question. Is it? Depends why you asked it first." The prosecutor ignored him and looked toward the open locker. "You reopened archived evidence based on a canine indication?" "No," the veteran said quietly. "He indicated before handling." The detective inspected a documented archive container in the presence of staff. The prosecutor turned toward him with mild irritation. "And you are?" "The one person in this room who doesn't work for your county." "Then maybe you should be careful how much authority you think you have inside it. Maybe you should be careful how fast you showed up." That landed. Good. The dog had not stopped staring. No growling now. No aggressive movement. Just the kind of unbroken attention that made people with secrets feel observed in places deeper than their faces. Dogs did not care about job titles, elected office, legal review, or county prestige. They cared about breathing, sweat chemistry, tension in the hands, invisible residue, and the faint involuntary changes that happened inside the human body when it walked into danger wearing a polite expression. "What exactly did the dog indicate on?" the prosecutor asked. The detective crouched and touched the faded label on the gray box. "Secondary residue collection from the original scene. Logged. Never properly worked." A dog indicated on a box. The prosecutor corrected. "That is not proof of anything." "No," the detective said. "It's the reason we're about to get proof." The prosecutor's face cooled a degree. "On whose authorization?" "Mine. You don't have standing to trigger modern reanalysis on a file of this age without review. Nobody needed review to let it rot." The detective answered. Rain struck the annex windows harder. The fluorescent buzz thickened the silence. And through it all the veteran watched the Malinois shift his nose once more toward the prosecutor's coat hem, and then back toward the gray box. Same family. Same chain. Not certainty yet, but enough to sharpen every instinct in the room. The prosecutor noticed the movement and very slightly moved the coat farther behind his leg, as if he had realized too late that the dog was reading more than obedience. "This case survived one ugly public cycle already," he said, "reopening it on instinct, and a canine scent red is politically reckless." "Maybe," the detective said, "if politics still outrank a murdered woman. Watch yourself." "No," the detective replied softly. "I think I'm done doing that." The retired soldier liked him more in that second than he had when the night started. Tired men who still fought for the right reason were rare. The danger with rare things was that corrupted systems recognized them early and moved fast. The evidence clerk looked trapped between wanting to disappear and wanting to hear the end of the sentence the county had spent nearly 3 decades refusing to say aloud. The prosecutor looked at the clerk next, which told the soldier something too. Men who could not easily control one strong-willed detective still tended to lean on weaker joints in the room. "Nothing leaves this annex without proper review," the prosecutor said. "You understand that, don't you?" The clerk swallowed hard. "I just handle intake and you handle nothing tonight except the law," the detective cut in. "Fresh bag. Full signature line. Now!" The prosecutor's eyes shifted back to him. "You're trying to jump chain." "No," the detective said. "I'm trying to stop chain from being interrupted." The veteran did not miss the fractional tightening in the prosecutor's jaw at the word interrupted. Men with nothing at stake rarely reacted to old evidence that way. The dog took another slow step forward. "Call him off," the prosecutor said too quickly. The veteran stayed still. "He isn't attacking you. He's reading you." "This is absurd." "Maybe," the veteran said. "Then why does it scare you?" "That did it." The prosecutor's expression did not break fully, but it cracked at the edges, just enough to show in the eyes. Only for a moment. But the dog saw it. The veteran saw it. The detective saw it. Even the evidence clerk, poor creature, seemed to understand that the room had just crossed out of bureaucracy and into something far more dangerous. "Seal the sample," the veteran said. The clerk hesitated, looked at the prosecutor, then at the detective, then at the dog, and finally moved because sometimes systems advance not because courage won, but because uncertainty entered the room hard enough that no one trusted corruption to hold itself together invisibly. Gloves went on. Fresh evidence sleeve came out. The gray box left the open locker under living eyes. The dog relaxed by less than a breath once it moved, enough for the soldier to understand that the center of the scent problem had shifted with the evidence. Good. Mobile now. Vulnerable now. Valuable now. The prosecutor watched the clerk seal the new transport bag as if watching a fuse being lit. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," the detective answered, "but tonight I'd rather make one in motion than one more in silence." The prosecutor turned toward him fully now. "You don't understand what this touches." "Then explain it." "That isn't how this works." "It is now." The dog stepped forward again, slow and deliberate, until he stood within arm's reach of the prosecutor's damp coat. The room stopped breathing. The Malinois lowered his nose toward the cuff, inhaled once, then tracked downward toward one polished shoe where courthouse dust, wet pavement, and some older trace clung beneath the leather shine. He looked back at the veteran with a sharpened alert that did not happen by accident. There it was again. Same world. Same set lineage. Same invisible bridge between dead evidence and a living man who should not have been there. "Call him off," the prosecutor said, and this time his voice betrayed him. Too quick. Too tense. Too human. "He's not biting you," the veteran said. "That's your conscience doing the rest." The detective's head turned sharply. "You were in the original review chain, weren't you?" The prosecutor straightened. "I observed portions of a legal review many years ago. So you saw the contradictions. I saw a chaotic file in a bad year. You saw conflicting residue notes. I saw limitations in the lab capacity of the time. And somehow, you still got here before dispatch should have reached county command." "That one hit clean," the prosecutor answered half a second too slowly. "The sheriff called me." No one in the room believed it fully. Not even the clerk. The veteran filed that too. The prosecutor realized the room had tilted against him, and did what men like him always did when a clean hole began slipping. He retreated into institutional tone. "I'll be filing an objection before anything leaves county custody." "File what you want," the detective said. You'll have to explain why you were in my evidence room before your own office should have known it was open. That landed even harder than the last one. The prosecutor knew it. He smiled then, but it was the kind of smile powerful men used when retreat needed to look like patience rather than setback. "Be careful what you wake up," he said. Then he turned and left with the same measured stride he had used entering, though now everyone in the annex understood the performance for what it was. The footsteps faded into the corridor. The rain kept tapping the windows. The dog watched the empty doorway until the last echo died. Only then did the room breathe again. The detective looked at the veteran. "You think he's in it?" The soldier looked down at the dog, whose body remained tense, unfinished, as though the real work had only just started. "I think your dog found a microscopic gunpowder trace in a sealed box after 27 years, he said. Then 5 minutes later a man with no business in this annex showed up before protocol should have reached him and reacted to the animal like truth had a pulse." He lifted his eyes. "And it is the polite version." The detective dragged a hand over his face. "If he stalls the transfer, momentum dies. Then don't give him time to stall it." The detective looked at the fresh evidence bag in the clerk's hands, then at the dog, then at the veteran, and for the first time that night his face stopped looking like a county employee and started looking like a man who had finally run out of patience with losing cleanly. "Come with me," he said. "This stopped being county work when he walked in." The veteran should have refused. The dog had already done what he was brought there to do. Everything after this should have belonged to institutions, chain logs, legal fights, and men paid to stand between truth and political convenience. But institutions were exactly what had buried the truth the first time. The dog stood beside him, still carrying that unfinished edge, and somewhere beneath the fluorescent buzz and the rain the veteran felt the old war-born certainty settle into place. The first truth in a dangerous night was almost never the last. "All right," he said. "But we move it like somebody already expects it not to arrive." The detective nodded once. "Good," he said. "Because somebody already cut the rear lot cameras 40 minutes ago." What would you do if the moment a dead case finally took a breath, the building around it began shutting itself down in exactly the ways that proved the case had never truly been cold at all, only guarded? The rear lot cameras had not failed by accident. They had gone black in a sequence too clean for weather and too careful for county incompetence, each screen dropping one after another like someone walking the perimeter with a map, a timer, and a very clear idea of where the truth would try to leave once it woke up. The detective showed the retired soldier the dead feeds inside the annex security cubicle, 3 small monitors glowing with signal loss stamps instead of images, while the evidence clerk sealed the gray box into a fresh transfer bag with hands that still had not stopped shaking since the prosecutor walked out. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed with the same tired electrical hum, but beneath that thin noise the soldier could hear the building's real voice now, ductwork breathing, rain tapping clogged gutters, old metal settling, one elevator somewhere in another wing opening and closing for no visible reason. The dog stood in the doorway of the cubicle with his head low and ears moving, reading the hall rather than the humans, because unlike the people around him, he understood that the box was no longer the only thing in motion. "Who knows you're moving it?" the soldier asked. "Just me, the clerk, dispatch, and now you," the detective said too quickly. The soldier let that answer hang in the stale office air for a beat. "Then you already have a leak," he said. "Because your prosecutor arrived before the chain should have reached him." The detective nodded once bitterly. "County side's dirty. Maybe sheriff's office. Maybe records. Maybe both." The dog turned sharply toward the rear corridor leading to the loading bay and the transfer exit. The movement was small, but the meaning behind it was not. His shoulders tightened, his nose lifted, and the soldier felt the familiar cold narrowing inside his chest. The building's set map had changed. Fresh human stress. Wet pavement. Metal. Movement. Wrongness. "We don't use the loading bay," he said. The detective looked up from the screens. "That's the direct path to my vehicle." "That's exactly why we don't use it." The evidence clerk opened his mouth as if he wanted to object on procedural grounds, but the look on the detective's face shut him down before the sound fully formed. "Front lobby's exposed," the detective said. "Good," the soldier answered. "Exposure works both ways. People planning a quiet interception prefer hidden exits, not crowded ones." The detective stared at him, then back at the map pinned beside the monitors, then at the fresh evidence case in his own hands. He made the decision fast, and the soldier respected him more for that than he would have for a smarter answer delayed too long. They left the cubicle single file, the detective carrying the sealed evidence in a county lock case, the soldier behind him, and the dog loose but tight to his leg, moving over polished tile with that eerie noiseless precision that made even government flooring feel like soft ground. They passed intake, old records, and a break room that smelled of burnt coffee and powdered creamer before reaching the main public lobby. Rain dragged silver lines down the front glass. 3 county cruisers sat under sodium lights outside, wet and still, and for one dangerous second the detective nearly relaxed. The dog did the opposite. The Malinois stopped halfway across the runner, lifted his nose, then turned sharply right toward the dark administrative offices. "What?" the detective whispered. The soldier followed the dog's line. At first, he saw only office glass and stacked chairs. Then lightning flashed outside and reflected just enough off the pane of the clerk supervisor's office to reveal the shape standing behind the frosted door. Human. Motionless. Waiting. "Down!" the soldier said, and the room exploded. The office door burst inward. A suppressed shot cracked through the lobby and punched the reception nameplate into splinters. The detective dropped hard behind an upholstered bench, clutching the locked case to his chest. The soldier shoved him lower and pivoted just as the second shooter shifted in the office corridor. The dog launched before the third shot cleared the suppressor, hit the first gunman high in the doorway, and drove the weapon line upward into the ceiling. Acoustic tile burst. White dust rained down. A second attacker stepped out from behind a brochure rack near the front doors, with a compact rifle hidden under a county range shell. Smart enough to dress local. Stupid enough to come inside reach. The soldier crossed the lobby in 2 savage strides, slammed the rifle barrel sideways, and sent the shot through the front window frame. Glass exploded outward. Rain and cold air rushed in. The attacker tried to backpedal into line for another shot and ran into the slick edge of the torn lobby mat. Half slip. Half beat. More than enough. The soldier drove him through the brochure stand hard enough to scatter plastic and county pamphlets across the floor. Behind him, the dog snarled with that deep, committed sound he only used when the man under him was still trying to fight. "Stay on the case!" the soldier barked, and the detective obeyed exactly the way good men obeyed when they had stopped pretending the room still belonged to procedure. He did not fire blindly. He did not stand up into the crossline. He kept the case low against his chest and watched the broken glass entrance, while the soldier crushed the second attacker's wrist and stripped the rifle away. The dog released only when the first gunman's weapon hand finally stopped moving. Even then he backed off 1 step and held, chest heaving, teeth red at the edge with somebody else's blood. "Good," the soldier said, though it came out colder than praise. The detective rose into a crouch, face pale. "Who the hell sends shooters into a public annex lobby? The kind of people who know exactly what's in that case." The soldier searched both men quickly. Burner phones. No wallets. Radio earpieces. A municipal utility keycard clone from another department. And in one inside pocket, folded inside a plastic sleeve to keep it dry, a traffic photo of the detective's sedan with the plate circled. Planned interception. Not reaction. The detective saw it, and his expression hollowed out. My car was the target. Your car was the easy version. Outside, one of the parked cruisers suddenly flashed headlights and rolled an inch. Someone else waiting. Another angle. Move, the soldier said. Left hull. Now. They cut away from the lobby through side records and into the old tax office wing, stepping around broken glass, rainwater, and spilled pamphlets while the dog took point again, nose alive, reading fresh intrusion through toner dust, wet carpet, and foreign sweat. The detective moved with the case held wrong for comfort and right for survival. Halfway down the wing, the dog stopped at the stairwell landing and looked down. A county uniformed body lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs in bad light. The detective surged forward, and the soldier caught his arm before he could descend blind. Look! Blood trail. One shoe missing. No movement. Maybe dead? Maybe bait? The detective swallowed something bitter and ugly. That's our night deputy. Then whoever came in first neutralized building security before waiting on the transfer. The dog lifted his nose toward the upper landing, not the injured man below. More movement above. The soldier made the choice instantly. We go up. That leads to the judicial connector. Good. Judicial parking dumps into the square. Better than a loading bay kill box. They climbed. On the third-floor connector, yellow emergency bulbs reflected off wax floor and framed portraits of dead county officials who had spent their lives pretending solemnity and governance were the same thing. The storm made the glass tremble. Halfway across, the dog stopped again, this time beside a trash receptacle under a family court notice board. He sniffed once, twice, then snapped his head toward the exit into judicial parking. The soldier crouched, pulled back the trash liner, and found a matte black phone taped beneath the rim, lens exposed through a puncture hole. Live eye? Live feed. Watching the route. He crushed it under heel. They had eyes inside the building, the detective said softly. Deep enough not to care who saw. The judicial lot outside was half empty under rain, a few county sedans, one clerk compact, and a dark unmarked SUV idling near the far gate with no lights on. Too neat. Too ready. The soldier watched it for 3 seconds and saw what he needed. Driver silhouette. Maybe passenger. Waiting for them to choose the obvious shape of escape. We don't take vehicles, he said. Then how do we get the sample out? The answer came from the dog. The Malinois turned sharply and pawed once at a steel hatch marked archive access in the stairwell corner. The detective frowned. That goes under the annex blocks. Old records tunnel. Print shop. Basement vaults. Good, the soldier said. No one expects anyone to choose the route the county forgot existed. The detective hesitated only a second before pulling the master key ring from his pocket. Somewhere behind them, in the annex, the wounded men would be found soon. Somewhere outside, the SUV at the gate was still waiting for a vehicle transfer that would never come. Somewhere above county command was probably beginning to decide how much of the night could be managed if it moved quickly enough. The lock turned with a rusted complaint. Cold, damp air breathed up from the dark. The dog slipped inside first. Good. The soldier followed. And just before the steel hatch pulled closed behind them, sealing out the rain, the waiting SUV, and every false sign of county legitimacy, the detective looked down at the evidence case in his hands and asked the question that had been waiting behind his face ever since the dog sat in front of locker B19. If that trace proves the old weapon was wrong, he said, how many people do you think already know? The soldier listened to the tunnel breathe around them and answered with the only honest thing he had. Enough to be afraid tonight. Have you ever stepped into a tunnel beneath a courthouse and felt, before you even saw the darkness ahead, that the people above had spent years pretending order stood on clean foundations while rot quietly thickened in the concrete below? The archive passage smelled of wet stone, mold, oxidized pipe, toner dust, rodent nests, and the stale paper breath of records no one opened unless they were already in trouble. Emergency bulbs burned every third fixture, leaving long strips of corridor in diluted amber gloom, and water dripped at slow, patient intervals from swaying conduit overhead. The Belgian Malinois moved ahead with a predator's silence, paws landing on damp concrete, as though each step had been chosen by weight and consequence rather than habit. The detective carried the evidence lock case with both hands now, no longer looking like a county man escorting property, more like a survivor carrying something he had only just begun to understand might get him killed before dawn. The retired soldier followed the dog and watched the tunnel the way he had once watched culverts in foreign compounds, searching not just for bodies, but for fresh scuffs, broken air patterns, wet footprints, disturbed dust, the geometry of somebody else's plan. "How far to the old print shop exit?" he asked. 7 minutes if the corridor's clear," the detective answered. 10 if the bulkhead near records is jammed." The soldier grunted. "Then assume 10. Somewhere behind them, faint through concrete and age, came the dull clang of metal. The hatch had been found. The detective heard it too, and tightened his grip on the case. "If they know the building this well, they might know the tunnel." "They know routes," the soldier said. "That doesn't mean they know which one we chose." "That's not comforting." "It isn't supposed to be." The dog stopped at the first branch and turned right without hesitation. The detective frowned. "Print shop is left." The soldier looked at the dog. The Malinois had lowered his head and was scenting along the lower edge of the right wall, where a thin draft seeped through a vent seam. New human passage. Maybe recent. Maybe waiting. "He's telling you left isn't clean anymore." The detective swallowed. "Right goes to deed archive and the old basement stair." "Then right goes." They turned. Rotted cardboard boxes sat collapsed behind chain-link partitions, labels washed into gray smears by years of damp. The whole lower county maze felt less like a storage system and more like a graveyard for deeds, tax disputes, death certificates, and every other paper shadow government created after real life had already bled. The dog passed row after row without interest until he reached a rust-flaked gate standing half open on improvised shims. He froze there, one paw raised, nose working. The soldier crouched and saw what the detective missed for half a second longer, thin muddy partial prints on the concrete beyond, recent enough that the moisture still showed darker than the surrounding dust film. Not county issue. Not old. 2 people. Moving fast. "They're ahead of us," the detective whispered. "Or crossing our path," the soldier said. "Can we lock this behind us?" The detective leaned closer. "Padlock's dead, but lower slide bolt still catches if it isn't bent." "Good. Save it until we pass." They slipped through. The dog took point into deed archive, where tall metal shelves held swollen ledgers and boxed maps from administrations long gone. Halfway down the second row he stopped so abruptly the soldier nearly touched him. Not ahead. Left. Between shelves. A faint sound followed, paper brushing paper. Human movement hidden inside records. The soldier moved low around the row end and found a man in county maintenance coveralls kneeling at an open service panel, flashlight in his teeth, hand on a radio splice. Not a hallway gunman. A building relay man. Someone patching comms. The maintenance worker heard the movement, turned, and saw the soldier 1 beat too late. The dog hit him center mass and drove him back into the shelving with a crash of ledgers and rust flakes. The flashlight spun away. The man reached for a sidearm hidden under the coverall flap and found the soldier's knee in his forearm first, then the dog's jaws clamping over the sleeve at the elbow, pitting the arm without wasting motion. The detective came around the row, breath sharp. Jesus. The soldier tore the radio unit free from the open wall panel and looked at the splice. He's patching building comms. The detective crouched. To what? The soldier checked the compact transmitter clipped inside the maintenance cart. To whatever channel lets them hear county response before county response hears itself. He looked down at the man under the dog. 40s maybe. Real maintenance badge. County patch. Inside man. You've got no idea what you're carrying. The man said through clenched teeth. Try me. The soldier answered. A trace hit won't save you. You think one old box changes what's already built? The detective stepped forward, rage burning clean through fatigue at last. You buried a homicide. The maintenance man laughed once. I protected this system. That sentence sat in the damp archive air like a smell. There it was. The disease under every corrupt institution. Not just greed. Not just fear. The belief that rot was acceptable if it kept the machine standing. The soldier had heard the same logic in uniforms, suits, insurgent cells, decorated offices, and classified briefings. Same sickness. Different vocabulary. How many? The detective asked. How many on county? The man smiled through pain. More than you can fire. Fewer than you think. Useless and revealing at once. The soldier looked back at the wall panel. Can you reverse the patch? He asked. The detective inspected the splice. Maybe. If I kill their listening line and wake the courthouse internal channel, dispatch will see every dead zone from the annex to here. Do it. The detective set the lock case against a shelf with obvious reluctance and started pulling cable. The soldier kept his weight on the maintenance man's shoulder while the dog held the arm. You were waiting in the tunnel? He asked. I was making sure the prosecutors got the right minute when you broke cover. So he's in it. The man gave a bloody little grin. Everybody with something to lose is in it. That was enough. The detective cut the final line, and the tunnel speakers crackled alive overhead, with a burst of static followed by an old courthouse safety message trying to sound calm in a system that had clearly not been designed for this kind of night. The maintenance man's smile disappeared. You just made this noisy. Good, the soldier said. Quiet was helping you. The detective snatched up the evidence case again. Somewhere above, alarms began stuttering awake. Somewhere above that, deputies and clerks and whoever was still honest in county infrastructure were going to start realizing their building had been turned against itself. They moved on, leaving the maintenance man zip-tied to a shelf bracket with his own radio wire. The tunnel no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake. Awake buildings had a way of telling on the people who abused them. They reached the deed stairwell and descended toward records processing, a lower chamber with conveyor tracks, microfilm cabinets, and industrial printers sitting silent in the dark. Rainwater drummed faintly through overhead runoff channels. The dog angled toward the east wall exit. The detective let out the beginning of a relieved breath, and that was enough warning by itself. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass. The soldier saw at the same instant the dog's shoulders squared. Back, he said. But the door burst inward before they could clear. This time the man entering wore a sheriff's deputy rain jacket open over body armor, badge visible, weapon up, eyes already locked on the case in the detective's hands. Behind him, in the loading corridor beyond, another silhouette waited with a shotgun. Local law. Or something wearing local law. The deputy took one step inside. Set it down, he said. Both of you. The detective stared at him in disbelief. You? The deputy's face stayed flat. Set it down. The soldier shifted just enough to clear the dog's angle on the doorway. "You still have time to not be this man," he said. The deputy answered like he had rehearsed it. "No. You still have time not to die over paperwork." The detective gave a harsh, ugly laugh. "That's all she was to you? Paperwork?" The deputy's eyes flicked for half a second toward the dog and back to the case. Afraid of the dog. Good. Honest men and crooked men both eventually learned the same lesson when a real working dog fixed on them in a room like that. The soldier let his breathing settle. One shooter through the threshold. One outside with broader weapon, worse angle. Dog fast enough to collapse the line if the deputy twitched wrong. Detective angry enough to do something stupid and less controlled. The whole shape of it sharpened into the cold, brutal calm he knew too well. "All right," he said softly. "I'm putting it down." The deputy nodded, tense, wanting compliance without trusting it. The soldier lowered his shoulder a fraction. The dog coiled. And as the detective finally understood what was coming not from words, but from tone, he let the lock case drop flat to the concrete at exactly the same moment the Malinois launched for the badge. What would you do if the men wearing the law's jacket were the very ones trying to kill the evidence, and the only thing moving faster than a bullet in that room was a dog, who had already decided the badge meant nothing? The Belgian Malinois crossed the distance between them in one explosive line of muscle and certainty, striking the deputy high in the chest before the man could bring the pistol down into a killing angle. The shot went wild into the ductwork. The dog's weight drove him backward into the frosted glass panel hard enough to crack it wide. The second man outside shouted and shoved the shotgun muzzle through the doorway. The retired soldier moved before the sound finished leaving the barrel. He kicked the fallen lock case across the floor toward the detective, not out of panic but assignment, and slammed into the door frame at the same moment the shotgun fired. The blast tore through an industrial printer instead of the detective's chest. Plastic shattered. Toner burst into the air in a black cloud. The soldier trapped the barrel under his forearm, twisted inward, and drove the door edge back onto the outer shooter's wrists with enough force to make the man cry out. The dog had already finished breaking the deputy's firing line and peeled off exactly when he needed to, not lingering in savagery, not wasting even 1 second that belonged to movement. Good dog. Perfect timing. The deputy hit the floor half breathless, weapon arm dead, and the detective, finally done being shot by county rot because the room no longer gave him time for shock, snatched the pistol and covered him from 3 feet away with hands that still trembled and eyes that no longer did. The soldier ripped the shotgun from the outer shooter before he could recover, checked the loading corridor, and saw only wet footprints, a janitor's cart overturned in haste, and the open dark beyond the service ramp. Not a full team in this corridor. Just a choke point. Someone above had still believed uniforms might handle the job more quietly than mercenaries once the building went noisy. They had been wrong. "Moved!" the soldier snapped, and the detective obeyed, one hand on the case, one on the captured pistol, backing toward the microfilm hull while the dog came off the downed deputy and fell into heel position again, sides heaving, eyes bright with battle focus. The soldier glanced once at the deputy's face and recognized him from the commendation board in the annex lobby. A patrol officer. Familiar smile in the framed photo. Real county. The kind of man who had probably told grieving families that justice took time while helping make sure time was exactly what killed it. The detective's face hardened into something nearly unrecognizable. "How long have you been feeding them?" he asked. The deputy spat blood onto the concrete and almost smiled. "Long enough to know county pays better in secrets than salary." The detective's grip tightened on the pistol so hard the knuckles whitened. For one dangerous second the soldier thought rage might do what corruption had not. "Don't," he said. "Not because he deserves breath. Because dead answers less." That reached him. Barely. The detective backed away with a shaking breath and kept the gun low. The soldier clipped the deputy's radio to his own belt, searched the outer shooter, and found a duplicate sheriff access fob, a courthouse stairwell pass, a printed map of the East Highway transfer route, and a folded lane diagram showing exactly where a county sedan would be easiest to box once it left judicial parking. Planned interdiction. Multiple layers. "You ever arrest anyone?" the soldier asked the deputy. "Or just steer the ones who mattered into dead paperwork?" The deputy laughed once and coughed on it. "You think this started with one case?" he said. "This county was bought before you ever came home." Bought? Not infiltrated. Not compromised. Bought? The detective flinched harder at that than he had at the gunfire. The old truth beneath most institutional rot. Money never needed everyone. Just enough people and enough doors to turn integrity into a career risk. Above them, footsteps began moving across the records processing mezzanine. Multiple sets. Faster now. No more stealth. The building had shifted from hidden interception to active hunt. The soldier felt the shape of the night change with it. "We lost the quiet version," the detective said. "Good," the soldier answered. "Quiet was helping them." They moved into the old county print shop through a narrow corridor lined with silent microfilm cabinets and dead fluorescent housings. The detective had called the print shop abandoned. The soldier had not believed him, and he was right not to. Fresh power hum lived under the dark. Paper dust on the floor had drag marks through it. Under a central worktable sat shrink-wrapped boxes of new county forms not yet in inventory, and along one wall leaned old printing plates beside empty chemical canisters. Hidden logistics. Corrupt systems always fed through forgotten rooms. The detective saw it all and looked suddenly older. "Right under us," he said. "All this time, right under us." "That's how Rob likes it," the soldier said. The dog stopped at a side cabinet, sniffed the lower vent seam, then looked back. Not an alert. A warning. Chemical trace. Fuel maybe. Solvent. Recent use. More traffic through this room than any county budget ledger would admit. Above them, a muffled voice called through the ductwork, shouting positions. Tactical teams maybe. County teams maybe. Or the same corrupted hands simply borrowing official voices now that the night had gone loud. The detective leaned one hand on the print table for a second too long, and the soldier saw the fatigue finally trying to drag him under. "Stay with me," he said. "I'm here." "That wasn't the question." The detective swallowed, straightened, and nodded once. Good. Men in that state either tightened under pressure or collapsed beneath it. He had not collapsed yet. "There's a service dumbwaiter in back," the detective said, pointing toward a waist-high steel hatch. "Used to move print materials to judicial records upstairs." The soldier looked at it and understood immediately. Narrow. Old. Loud. Visible if used. Perfect. "Can it hold the case?" "Yes." "Not us." "Good. Then the case goes up." The detective stared. "You want to send the evidence alone?" "No. I want to send them something shaped like evidence moving loud enough to make desperate men chase the wrong floor." The detective understood a second later. "Decoy." "Exactly." The dog was already watching them both, reading tone rather than words, waiting for the next assignment. The soldier opened the locked case, removed the sealed evidence bag with gloved care, then took a flat waterproof sleeve from his own pack and wrapped the sample inside a second layer. The Malinois stood without being told. The soldier loosened the lower strap on the dog's harness and slid the protected packet into an interior pouch built for breaching maps and small field kits. The dog did not flinch, did not even glance down. He only watched the soldier's face for instruction. "Guard this," The soldier murmured, fingers tightening the strap. No one touches it but me. The dog blinked once. Enough. The detective stared at the animal in disbelief. If I live to write this, nobody's going to believe me. Then live first. They stuffed the empty lock case with bundled county forms, a metal ledger backing, and enough dead weight to preserve shape and heft, then sealed it again. The detective shoved it into the dumbwaiter shaft. It clanged upward through the steel chase like a thrown alarm bell. Instantly the voices above shifted. Running. Shouting. One man yelled from the mezzanine that the package was moving toward judicial records. Good. Bait taken. The soldier turned to the detective. Route. Vehicular records annex. The detective said without hesitation now. 1 floor lower. Then boiler corridor to the tax and pound garage. That gets us a car? Maybe. The soldier looked at him flatly. I'm getting tired of that word. Me too. They moved. The dog led through boiler heat and pipe shadow, while the evidence rode hidden beneath his harness, and the building above tore itself apart chasing a box full of paper. Halfway down the corridor, the stolen deputy radio crackled alive. North Teen to interior, package moving judicial, repeat, package moving judicial. The soldier clicked it off. Useful. Confirmation. The light had spread. They entered lower vehicular records, a cavern of impound files, towing invoices, accident evidence photos, and seized property ledgers stacked high enough to make the place feel less like storage and more like a burial chamber for every failed civic moment the county had ever cataloged. The detective crossed to a caged keyboard and began testing tags with fingers that still would not stop trembling. One of these opens Fleet Overflow. Which one? If luck loves me, Old County Utility SUV. The soldier did not answer. He had long ago stopped asking luck for anything. The dog turned sharply toward the service ramp and froze again. A woman's voice echoed from outside. County Tactical. Announce! The detective went still. That could be real. Could be. Or they learned another voice. The dog did not bark. He stood at the threshold with one paw lifted, nose working, body uncertain in a very specific way. Humans. Guns. Adrenaline. No immediate attack. No trust either. Useful middle. The woman called again, closer now. Detective, if that's you, sound off. We've got officer down reports and judicial alarms. The detective looked at the soldier. I know that voice. Do you trust it? He hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. I trusted the deputy in the print shop. Good. He was learning. The soldier tried another key in the fleet cage. Turned. Then no answer. He said, if it's real, we leave them blind. If it's fake, you open the garage to a kill box. The detective exhaled through his teeth. I hate that you're right so often. You only notice when it matters. The engine of an old county utility SUV coughed, rattled, then caught. Outside, the woman's voice changed from command to warning. Whoever you are, she shouted through the concrete echo. They already flipped the courthouse perimeter. If you're carrying the evidence, do not come out the front. The soldier looked once at the detective. Real or not, the night had just gotten louder. And somewhere above them, beyond the garage ramp and the storm, the full weight of the county was beginning to wake up. What would you do if the whole county suddenly woke up at once, not because truth had won, but because truth had become too dangerous to stay quiet, and every road leading out now felt like a mouth already waiting to close? The old county utility SUV coughed, rattled, and then caught with a deep neglected shudder that filled the impound garage with the smell of old gasoline, warm dust, wet rubber, and the faint mildew of upholstery nobody had sat on with dignity in years. The detective dropped into the passenger seat with the ring of fleet keys still clenched in one hand and the captured pistol in the other. The retired soldier took the wheel. The Belgian Malinois leaped into the rear seat in one clean motion, landing without noise despite the real evidence riding hidden beneath his harness panel. Outside the garage ramp, sirens converged in staggered waves, one set from the county square, another from the river road, a third too far south to matter yet, and the soldier knew before he eased the SUV into gear that not all of them belonged to honest hands. Corrupt systems rarely collapse cleanly. They split. Some men ran toward the truth to bury it. Others ran toward it because they still believed the badge meant something. In the middle of that confusion, uniform color stopped meaning very much at all. The woman's voice from the ramp came again, closer now, echoing down the concrete turn. "Detective! If that's you, answer before you move!" The detective half turned toward the sound, conflict written openly across his face. "I know that voice." The soldier kept the headlights off and rolled the SUV slowly toward the inner pillar line, studying the ramp reflection in the cracked security mirror above the exit. "Do you trust it?" The detective hesitated. "I trusted the deputy in records." "That isn't an answer." The dog in the back seat had risen, ears high, head angled toward the voices, body calm but loaded. Not alarmed enough for immediate attack. Not relaxed enough for trust. Useful middle. Another voice joined the first, male this time, farther back and louder. "Thermal picked engine heat. They're moving!" Too much information shouted too openly. Whether the tactical pair outside were real or fake, pressure was already changing the way they talked. Pressure caused mistakes. "Seat belt," the soldier said. The detective barely snapped it into place before the soldier dropped the SUV into drive and sent it up the garage ramp with the lights still off. The woman shouted, "Stop! Stop the vehicle!" He did not. The two figures at the top split instinctively, which suggested at least some real training, but the larger figure brought his long gun up across the hood line in the wrong way, squaring himself to stop the car instead of diving clear. Wrong priority if he truly believed innocent people were inside. The soldier drove straight at that mistake. Tires screamed on wet concrete. The long gun dipped too late. The SUV blasted between the barricade drums and the tactical pair with inches to spare, clipping a traffic cone hard enough to send it spinning across the flooded lot. No shots followed. Good. Maybe they were real. Maybe they were just too slow. Once they hit the county square road, the storm swallowed them. Rain smeared every light into liquid streaks and shattered reflections across courthouse bronze, patrol hoods, crosswalk paint, and pooled gutters. The soldier kept the headlights dead for 2 blocks, steering by ambient glow and instinct, while the detective twisted in his seat trying to read the maze of movement behind them. 3 units pushing north," he said. "Can't tell if they're after us or just flooding the square." The soldier took a hard left at the old post office and flashed the lights once only long enough to read the flooded intersection ahead. "Official state lab?" he asked. "Downtown satellite. 43 minutes. Too long. Unofficially, there's a temporary regional branch at the old agriculture complex off Route 8. Overnight freezer intake. 1 duty tech. Stay chain if we get it logged. Why wasn't that your first route?" The detective gave him a hollow look. Because County Command would know it too. County Command already knows too much. The dog stayed standing in the rear instead of bracing, eyes fixed through the back glass. The soldier checked the mirror and saw it. One dark SUV with no roof bar holding steady 2 intersections back, too clean through the flooded turns to be panic traffic, too disciplined to be random. "We're tailed," he said. The detective twisted farther around. "Which one?" "Black SUV. No bar. Too consistent." The detective swore softly. Could be prosecutor people. Could be sheriff plainclothes. Could be county-owned and stripped. meaning it's bad either way. Instead of turning east toward the agriculture road, the soldier drove south. The detective looked at him sharply. That's wrong. I know. Then why are we? Because if they know the right road, we show them the wrong one first. The detective exhaled hard through his teeth. You really do think like an ambush. The soldier kept his eyes on the storm-dark road. No. I think like someone who's survived too many. They crossed the old rail district where freight lines cut black scars through warehouse shadows, and sodium lights buzzed over puddles deep enough to hide a tire. The black SUV behind them held its distance beautifully, never pressing too close, never falling too far back. Professional enough to worry him. The dog's stare never left it. Can we ditch them in the yards? The detective asked. Too open. Industrial strip? Too many choke cameras. Then where? The answer came from the road signs flashing by in rain, and from the dog when the Malinois suddenly shifted left, and stared not behind them anymore, but toward the flood control access road sign at the bridge line. Good dog. The soldier cut hard right down the maintenance lane beneath the raised river bridge. The SUV fishtailed once on oil sheen and storm runoff, then caught. Behind them, the black-tail vehicle overshot the turn by half a second before correcting. Good. The underpass fed into a county pump service road no one but flood crews or smugglers would willingly use in weather like this. Concrete walls rose on both sides, marked with old river levels, municipal warnings, and graffiti layered by years. Halfway down, the lane split around a barricaded maintenance basin and a stack of giant culvert pipes. The soldier killed the lights and brake behind the pipe yard shield. Out, he said. The detective blinked. What? Out. Now! Leave the SUV. The evidence is on the dog, remember? That landed. Good. They moved fast. The soldier opened the rear door. The dog jumped out silent and ready, and together they crouched behind the wet concrete pipe stacks while the detective huddled lower than his pride would have allowed him 3 hours ago. 30 seconds later the black SUV rolled slowly into the underpass lane and stopped beside the abandoned county utility vehicle. 2 men got out. Neither wore uniform. One carried a compact rifle. The other held a phone low beneath his coat to shield the screen from rain. Vehicle's empty, the rifleman said. The second man answered. They can't have gotten far. The dog lowered his body. The soldier put one hand lightly against the harness. Not yet. The man with the phone stepped closer to the pipe yard, and the soldier saw his face in the sodium wash. Prosecutor's investigator. He had been in the annex hallway months ago when the detective first pushed to reopen file notes. Inside legal office. Inside tonight. The detective recognized him too and mouthed something vicious under his breath. The investigator lifted his voice over the rain. You still have a path to make this disappear clean. The line would almost have been elegant if it didn't mean murder hidden behind process. The detective's face hardened into something older than anger. That bastard sat across from the victim's sister and told her the county had exhausted every avenue. Good. Rage with a target. Dangerous but useful. The soldier leaned toward the dog's ear. Left one first. Quiet. The Malinois did not blink. The soldier rose just enough from behind the pipe stack and hit the county SUV panic alarm with the stolen key fob. The abandoned vehicle exploded into horn and flashing lights. Both men spun toward it. That was enough. The dog launched from darkness and hit the rifleman low and hard, driving him face first into the flooded lane before the muzzle could settle. The investigator reached under his coat instead of for cover, and the soldier was already on him, smashing the drawing arm across the elbow and sending the pistol skidding beneath the drainage rail. The man stumbled backward into the concrete wall, breath leaving him in a grunt. The detective came out from cover then, not because the plan required it, but because some debts demanded a face. "You told them to stop calling," he said. Rain ran down the investigator's cheeks and turned the blood at his lip black. "You don't understand who this touches." "No," the detective said. "I think I finally do." The soldier zip-tied both men and searched them quickly. Burner phones. Route printouts. A portable jammer unit small enough to explain the camera blackouts and dead patches. And in the investigator's inner coat pocket, sealed against the rain in a plastic sleeve, a temporary suppression order already prepared with the freights per case number typed into the header, ready to stop the evidence transfer in court the second it surfaced. The detective stared at it with disbelief and discussed fighting for space in his face. "He was going to kill the evidence legally before it ever got tested." "He still might," the soldier said. "If we keep driving exactly where they expect." The detective looked up. "Then where do we go?" The soldier glanced at the dog, who had jumped into the rear of the black SUV and was already staring through the wet side glass toward the river road, as if reminding them the next move mattered more than the argument. "Tell me one person," the soldier said, "who doesn't work for your county, your lab, or your court, and who can't be bought tonight." The detective answered almost immediately this time, because the night had stripped him down to the truth. "The victim's sister," he said. "She runs archive operations in the old university chemistry annex." The soldier held his gaze a second longer, then nodded. "Good. Then we stop thinking like county employees." He climbed behind the wheel of the black SUV, the dog settling in the back with rain still dripping off his muzzle, and the real evidence still hidden against his ribs. The detective got in beside him, clutching the suppression order like it was proof that the county had finally stopped pretending. Somewhere above them, the storm kept pounding the bridge. Somewhere downtown, the prosecutor was probably already moving paper faster than truth. But now the truth was moving too, and it had a better guide than paperwork. It had a veteran who no longer believed institutions would save anything, a detective too angry to quit, and a Belgian Malinois who had followed a microscopic sent through dead time and refused to let it die again. What would you do if, after a whole night of ambushes, corruption, burning buildings, bought uniforms, and a microscopic truth guarded by a dog who never once chose wrong, the last barrier between justice and burial was no longer violence itself, but whether one honest hand could still take hold of the evidence before the rotten ones closed around it again? The black SUV cut through the storm toward the old university chemistry annex with its lights dead for the first mile, and only brief flashes after that, the wipers fighting rain that seemed determined to erase every lane line and sign from the world. The detective sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand wrapped around the folded suppression order they had ripped from the prosecutor's investigator, and the other braced against the dash, as if force alone might hold the night together long enough for it to matter. In the rear, the Belgian Malinois remained standing despite every turn, body balanced effortlessly, eyes fixed not on the city slipping by in streaks of wet light, but on the darkness behind them, where every set of approaching headlights still had the power to become a death sentence. He did not know he carried the one surviving thread that could pull a murdered woman back out of 27 years of county lies. He knew only that his handler had given him something to protect, and that the world had spent the night trying to take it. Sometimes that was a purer kind of intelligence than anything paperwork ever produced. The detective's directions were clipped and exact now, stripped of county language, stripped of apology, stripped of everything unnecessary. The old chemistry annex sat at the edge of a dead campus extension the county had promised to redevelop for years and never touched, a brick and concrete structure from an era when laboratories were built like bunkers and education still believed knowledge required walls thick enough to survive fire. Only one wing showed light through the storm. One. Enough. They left the SUV half hidden behind an overgrown maintenance berm and moved on foot through the back service lane where runoff rushed along broken curbs and weeds pushed through old faculty pavement. Beneath the side solid entrance awning stood the victim's sister in a raincoat over scrubs and a wool sweater, hair pinned back, flashlight low in one hand, revolver lower in the other, face cut hard by years of waiting for someone to stop lying to her. She did not greet the detective first. She looked at the dog. The Malinois stopped 3 paces from her, rain dripping from his muzzle, chest rising hard, but his eyes steady. Her gaze moved once to the harness panel, then to the veteran. "That where it is?" she asked. He nodded. "Still sealed," she answered with one word. "Good." Only then did she look at the detective. "If you brought me one more ghost, I swear I'll bury you with it." The detective did not defend himself. "I brought you a chance." Her face did not soften. "Those weigh more." She led them inside through a solid entry that smelled of acetone, bleach, old tile, refrigeration hum, and the faint ozone bite of scientific equipment left running longer than comfort allowed. The lab she chose was secure internal and ugly in the way honest rooms often were: steel tables, reinforced shutters, microscopy hood, backup power, not much else. Good. Pretty institutions were easy to corrupt because people confused appearance for integrity. This room had not wasted money trying to look harmless. The dog shook once on the threshold, spraying rain in an arc, then crossed to the center of the room and checked every vent, every cabinet gap, every seam like he understood perfectly that walls and locks meant nothing until he read them himself. The veteran removed the evidence packet from the hidden harness pouch with deliberate care and placed it on the stainless prep tray under the woman's waiting gloved hands. She checked the seals, the bag, the signatures, the tag, every line of its travel, then looked once at the detective. "If chain is wrong, I won't touch it. Chain is right," he said. "More right than the county deserves." She almost answered, thought better of it, and turned to the work. Watching an honest forensic mind focus could feel strangely like prayer stripped of religion. She opened the outer waterproof sleeve, left the evidence bag intact, photographed every edge, every notation, every old mark on the faded label, then read the handwritten note under magnification with the stillness of a woman who had imagined this exact object 1,000 times over the years, and never once believed she would actually get to hold it. "You know what you're looking for," the veteran said. She didn't look up. "I know what they told us didn't exist." The detective stood behind her like a man afraid to breathe wrong. The dog shifted once toward the rear service door of the lab and froze. The veteran saw it. Then he heard it. Metal touching metal on the far side of the lock. Someone picking or unlocking the rear maintenance entry. The woman cursed softly and killed the overhead lights, leaving only the task lamps over the tray and the green glow of refrigeration panels. The room turned surgical and dangerous. "How many entrances?" the veteran asked. 3. Front loading. Solvent side. Rear maintenance. Can you keep working? She pulled the revolver from beneath her raincoat and thumbed back the hammer with total steadiness. "I waited 27 years, she said. "I can do 2 things at once." The detective took position beside the rear wall with the captured pistol. The veteran moved off the door line. The dog stepped forward and lowered his head, body tightening into that same focused violence he had worn in the annex before the first gunman ever showed his face. The handle turned. The door opened 6 inches. "Facilities," a man's voice called. Too calm. The dog launched the instant a second silhouette filled the gap behind the first. He hit the lead intruder at shoulder height and slammed him backward through the doorway. A pistol flashed behind the falling body. The veteran fired once through the seam and heard a grunt. The detective drove the door the rest of the way open, and the threshold became a brutal knot of white muzzle flash, wet boots, metal hinges, and human panic. One attacker went down under the dog. Another hit the shelving outside, clutching his side. A third came low from the maintenance corridor with a suppressed handgun and fired twice into the lab, one round shattering a solvent rack, the other slamming sparks off the task lamp arm beside the evidence tray. The victim's sister ducked, shielded the tray with her own body for one impossible beat, then rose and shot the third man clean through the shoulder with the same control she would have used turning a valve. No scream. No dramatic pause. Just movement. Good. Honest. Final. Smoke feathered under the vents. Broken glass and acetone stung the room. The dog released the first attacker the instant the body stopped being dangerous, and pivoted toward the second with not one wasted second of savage confusion. Perfect transitions. The veteran crossed the threshold, smashed the wounded second shooter's jaw with the rifle stock, and smelled exactly what he had expected: wet wool, gun oil, courthouse dust, old paper, same administrative air the prosecutor carried like a second skin. These men weren't outsiders. They belonged to the same living structure as the buried file. "How many more?" he asked. The man smiled, blood through his teeth. "Enough to burn the annex after we leave." The veteran hit him again, not from anger but correction. Behind him, the woman at the microscope hood finally said the sentence the whole night had been crawling toward. "I have recoverable particulate." The room changed. Even the detective seemed to stop shaking for one suspended second. "How much?" he asked. "Enough." She shifted the image layer on the monitor, magnifying tiny burned grains of residue until they looked like scarred planets. "And it is not random environmental contamination." The veteran looked over once. Under the task light and magnification, the particles bloomed into the kind of ugly microscopic beauty only violence could leave behind. Aged gunshot residue. Preserved in protected debris. Not fantasy. Not hope. Real. "Can you say it excludes the old weapon?" the detective asked. "Not in court yet," she said. "But I can say this much. The composition is wrong for the weapon tied to the county suspect. Wrong propellant family. Wrong particulate pattern. Somebody built the case on a lie." There it was. Not just failure. Design. Direction. The old suspect had never been the answer. He had been the cover. Then the dog snapped his head toward the ceiling. A dull thump rolled through the ventilation chase, followed by the hiss of liquid being poured. "Fuel?" The wounded attacker laughed through broken teeth. "Told you." The detective went white. "They're going to fire wash the annex." The woman sealed the partially triaged evidence into a secondary transport tube, mirrored the image data to an off-site archive server still linked to the university network, and shoved both the tube and the drive toward the veteran. "If I die in here," she said, "you get that to state homicide and make them write her real story." "You're not dying here," he said. "Then move." They took the only route left, a chemical waste chute leading to the east courtyard compactor bay. The dog went first without being told, claws scraping metal as he dropped into darkness. Then the detective. Then the woman, gritting through pain and age with a fury that looked stronger than either. The veteran came last, dragging the hatch shut behind him, as the fire alarms finally reached full scream. The chute emptied them into cold rain, concrete, and the stink of chemical bins. Behind them, black smoke pushed from the annex vents. Ahead lay the botany greenhouses, the service lane beyond, and one more route toward the river levee. They moved through storm and shadow while voices and headlights swept the campus, while the greenhouse swallowed them for one more violent confrontation, while hidden shooters learned too late that hunting the dog was a different thing entirely from outrunning him, and by the time they burst out the far side, every clean road had already been boxed. County vehicles. Unmarked units. Even university transport at the far lane. every institution in one trap. The detective looked at the blockade and said the thing fear always wanted said. No more routes. But the dog had already found one. Under the broken levee grate, through the maintenance culvert, down into mud-black drainage that fed the old river evidence dock and, beyond it, the one place corruption had not yet reached in time, the State Flood Control Lab Annex, a facility nobody in county politics had thought to fear until tonight. So they went to ground. The dog first, carrying the truth under his harness like it was just another thing his handler had asked him to guard. The veteran behind him. Then the detective half carrying the victim's sister through ankle-deep black water, while above them the university emergency scene burned, flashed, shouted, and lied to itself in public. They emerged beneath the levee at the old river evidence dock just before dawn. Sodium lamps painted the wet concrete in sick yellow. The river moved black and heavy below. To the right, across a runoff lane and one security turnstile, stood the state annex, lights on, shutters sealed, honest possibility glowing through reinforced glass. Between them and it idled one final sedan. County prosecutor. Engine running. Headlights dead? Of course. The assistant county prosecutor stepped out into the rain alone now. No umbrella, no folded coat, no more courthouse polish except the habit of standing as if system still belonged to him. He looked at the detective, then the sister, then the veteran, and finally the dog. "You've made this larger than it needed to be," he said. The detective laughed once, harsh and broken. "It was never small. You just kept it quiet." The prosecutor's eyes slid to the dog's harness. There. Final betrayal. He knew. "Hand over the evidence," he said. "State chain can still take this clean if you stop contaminating it with theatrics." The victim's sister stepped forward despite the pain in her leg. "You buried my sister." For the first time his face shifted. Not guilt. Irritation. "Your sister died in a messy year and a worse jurisdiction. People did what they could." "No," she said. "People did what served them." The dog stood between the veteran and the prosecutor now, body low, weight forward, eyes locked. The prosecutor saw that, and made the same mistake every corrupt man before him had made that night. He looked at the dog as the hinge on which the entire story now turned. "I don't want the animal hurt," he said. The veteran believed him in the narrow technical sense. Men like him rarely wanted damage. They wanted outcomes. "That makes one of us," the veteran said. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "You don't know what that sample touches. That old homicide stopped being just a homicide years ago. It became leverage, access, protection. One correction now doesn't fix the machine. It tears the cover off while it's still moving." There it was. The logic under every diseased institution. Do not expose the crime because the structure carrying it is too large to survive the exposure. Better to preserve the machine and let the dead remain paperwork. The veteran had heard the same morality in other uniforms, other countries, other wars. It had never once sounded less rotten for being articulate. "You're confessing," the detective said. The prosecutor almost smiled. "I'm explaining scale to a man who still thinks justice is a filing action." The dog moved one step. The prosecutor's eyes followed. Fatal instinct. The veteran saw it and knew the line had arrived. The next second the prosecutor shifted his right hand toward the dog instead of the humans. Maybe for a weapon, maybe for a dart, maybe simply because in his mind the dog was the only thing left that mattered. He never got to finish the motion. The Malinois launched at the exact same moment the veteran moved. The dog hit high, chest to arm, and drove the prosecutor backward across the wet dock concrete hard enough to spin him against the sedan hood. The veteran closed the distance before the hidden pistol fully cleared, struck the wrist once, the elbow once, and tore the weapon free as the prosecutor lost footing on algae and rain. The detective came in from the side and drove him against the car, with every dead year of the case behind the motion. The victim's sister stepped forward, took the fallen pistol, and stood over him with a steadiness more frightening than anger. "No more hearings," she said. Across the runoff lane, the state flood control annex door opened. Two actual state technicians in emergency rain gear emerged with rifles held uncertainly and ID visible under their hoods. Honest hesitation. Beautiful sight. They shouted for hands. The detective raised his first. Then the veteran, after unclipping the evidence packet from the dog's harness and holding it high beneath the floodlights where the chain seals, secondary transport tube, and log signatures were all visible through the waterproof sleeve. One technician's whole posture changed when he saw it. Properly preserved evidence arriving alive. Real thing. Real chain. "Bring it here!" he yelled. They crossed the lane together, the veteran carrying the truth, the dog tied at his knee, the detective and the victim's sister behind him, while state hands received the tube under camera, timestamp, emergency log, and secure locker chain. Metal shut. Lock engaged. Recorded. There. The truth no longer depended on a courthouse, a county sedan, a bought deputy, a burning university annex, or the hidden pouch of a working dog. It now lived one layer beyond the county's reach. Dawn came gray over the river. By then statements had started, state investigators had arrived, county command had begun splitting between the honest and the desperate, and the first verified scan from the annex had returned exactly what the victim's sister saw under magnification. Aged gunshot residue preserved in protected debris, inconsistent with the weapon tied to the old county suspect. Not the end of the case. Not yet. But enough to officially say the old answer had been wrong. Enough to reopen the wound under a name no one could safely ignore anymore. The prosecutor was taken in before the rain stopped. The detective sat on the dock curb with his face in his hands after hearing the first confirmed result. Not broken, not healed, just emptied in the way men sometimes were when a thing they had chased too long finally stopped being theory and became weight. The victim's sister stood by the annex window and cried once without sound, then stopped as if she had waited too long to let grief on the ending. The veteran stood apart with the dog beside him, while the first weak daylight touched the river. A state medic wrapped the Malinois' cut paw from the greenhouse fight, and the dog tolerated exactly 3 seconds before looking up at the veteran to confirm whether this indignity had official purpose. "He's helping," the veteran said softly. The dog allowed the bandage after that, though with visible skepticism. Good. A little arrogance in loyal creatures was often earned. Days later the final comparison came back. Second shooter. Wrong weapon. Deliberate misdirection. The old suspect had been a shield, not an answer. The victim's sister found the veteran outside the temporary state review office with the report in her hands, and said the one thing the whole story had been dragging itself toward since Locker B-19. "He gave my sister back her real story." The veteran looked down at the dog, at the scarless black muzzle, the bandaged paw, the impossible steady animal who had followed a microscopic scent through a dead file, and refused to let it die again, and understood something he had not expected to feel. Not redemption. Something more honest. Return. Because when the work was over and the case was finally breathing on its own, the future no longer felt like a hallway narrowing toward nothing. It felt like something earned. And it had been earned by a Belgian Malinois who found invisible truth where the world had stopped looking, and by the few broken, stubborn people who followed him all the way back into the light.